Imagine if I told you that one of the greatest action heroes of our era, the Bruce Willis, stormed off a live talk show not in rage, but in something far more profound, disappointed silence. And imagine if that instant did not begin in bellowing and scandal, but instead with a lone, throwaway quip that veered across a boundary many of us didn't even notice, until it was past the point of no return. This is not a celebrity breakdown or a tabloid story. It's something much more human, and quite frankly, more insightful than anyone had anticipated. It all went down on what was supposed to be a run-of-the-mill evening on Jimmy Kimmel Live. You know the drill: some easy jokes, a mention of the current movie, some laughs, and on to the next guy. But this time, the late-night formula broke down, and not because someone messed up a line or forgot a cue. No, this time the unraveling came from something deeper. Something most of us can recognize in our own lives, even if we've never sat under stage lights or faced a national audience. It began quietly, an edge to a joke, a smile that stings. You've likely had it yourself, sitting across from someone who's just kidding. But somehow, it doesn't sound like a joke. Perhaps it's a dinner at home, or a meeting at work, or even a reunion with an old acquaintance. They laugh, others laugh, but you can feel the bruise before you know you've been struck. That's where Bruce Willis ended up, standing in the hot lights of studios, taking questions that weren't so much questions as smoothly disguised pokes aimed at eliciting laughter from tension. And for some time he went along, because that's what pros do, especially when there's a camera present. But then it gets interesting. Bruce didn't blow up. He didn't rage out. Instead, he leaned in, gently, solidly, and with a kind of deliberate poise born only of surviving more than a few wars, on screen and in real life. What ensued wasn't a tantrum, it was a reckoning. He belittled not only the host before him, but the very notion of what late-night television has devolved into. A forum where vulnerability is taken advantage of, where authenticity is ridiculed, and where laughter is often had on the backs of dignity. And for a generation of viewers, many of whom recall a time when interviews were discussions, not battles, it resonated. Because at its core, this moment was about something we've all felt, that creeping sense that kindness is starting to take a back seat, that too often people with a microphone or a platform forget the responsibility that comes with it, that somewhere along the way, entertainment began to confuse cruelty for comedy. And Bruce, he taught us that you don't have to shout the truth, that standing up for yourself doesn't always mean screaming at the top of your lungs. It just means knowing who you are and refusing to be anything less, even when things get tough. So what actually did happen that night? Was it an actor protecting his legacy? A host goaded by his own ego? Or was it something greater, a cultural moment that stripped away the gilded veneer of late-night television and laid bare what many have long suspected? Stay tuned, because in this video, we're bringing you inside the moment that left a studio in stunned silence and a host at a loss for words. You won't be looking at this the same again. When Bruce Willis stepped onto the stage of Jimmy Kimmel Live, nobody in attendance could have ever guessed what the rest of the night would bring. What was to be a mere fluff-piece celebrity interview quickly became much more intense, ending with security rolling up quietly one of Hollywood's most recognizable action heroes out the rear exit. To begin, it appeared to be just another late-night interview, but within minutes, things took a sudden turn and resulted in one of the most discussed battles in television history. And the why? Jimmy Kimmel's condescending attitude pushed Bruce to the edge. This was not your typical Hollywood difference of opinion. It was an all-out fallout that pulled back the curtain on the seamy side of late-night talk shows and exposed what happens when a host forgets there are boundaries to showbiz snark. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of what actually happened, take a moment to subscribe and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Trust me, what you're going to hear could very well change the way you look at these innocent talk show interviews for life. Now, about that night, I'll never forget. Even before Bruce settled into his chair, there was tension in the room. Those backstage were already gossiping that Kimmel had been making jokes at the expense of Bruce during rehearsal, scoffing at his recent film roles, and throwing around questions about whether the aging icon had a place in Hollywood anymore. Producers apparently tried to steer things back on track, but Kimmel wasn't having it. He brushed them off with that familiar grin of his, the one that says, "Don't worry, I've got this," and carried on as if it were all just part of the game. Then came the moment. Bruce sat down, and instead of the warm welcome guests usually get, Kimmel leaned back in his chair, flashed that smug smile, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Willis, the man who single-handedly saved Christmas in Die Hard, though I'm not really sure what he's been saving lately." The crowd released some stunted laughter, but they hesitated. The kind of uncertain laughter you get when people are not really sure whether or not the joke was funny or rather cruel. Bruce, to his credit, kept his cool, but his jaw clenched. He smiled stiffly and responded with a cool, dry tone. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Always great to be here with somebody who obviously does their research." His sarcasm wasn't shouting, but it was cutting enough to cut through the lights in the studio. Jimmy scrunched up his eyes, most likely realizing Bruce wasn't going to play games like some of his other guests. But it didn't deter him. If anything, it looked like it riled him up further. "So, Bruce," he said, leaning forward with pretended curiosity, "tell me about your most recent project. I gotta ask, and I'm sure the audience is wondering too, do you even see these movies before you get signed on? Or do you just fly in, cash the check, and hope for the best?" And just like that, the air went still. It seemed as if the air had been pulled directly out of the studio. That final dig at Kimmel struck with the force of a heavy weapon, and everyone in the audience knew it. Laughter ceased in an instant, giving way to a charged silence that filled the room. Everyone could feel that this was not going to be an ordinary late-night interview. Bruce leaned forward slightly, that characteristic intensity dancing in his eyes, the same one that had created a legend in Hollywood. In a voice steady but laced with steel, he replied, "I do this job seriously, Jimmy. Every part, every show, I give it my all. Maybe that's something you can understand. Though from what I've seen of your show, I'm not so sure commitment is something you're really good at." The words hit like a scalpel. You could have sworn you heard the energy change, like someone had flicked a switch. Bruce was no longer just a visitor. He was in command, and Jimmy was aware of it. But rather than backing down, Kimmel pushed harder into the confrontation, perhaps believing he could regain control with his typical combination of sarcasm and smirks. "Oh, come on, Bruce, we're all pals here," he said with that old faux charm. "I'm just stating what everyone else is thinking. You were the action hero, John McClane, the one-man army who cleared out entire buildings of bad guys. And now, you're making these straight-to-streaming films that people put on while they're folding their laundry. What happened to that guy?" It was a low blow, cloaked in a joke, sure, but intended to humiliate. The sort of jab that only has any effect if the guest is willing to play along. But Bruce Willis isn't some young buck actor eager to prove himself. He's not out there exchanging barbs for laughs. He's a veteran, a journeyman. And besides, he's battled much more legitimate wars than an insult war with a host on late-night TV. Bruce didn't bat an eye. Instead, he glared directly at Kimmel, his voice dropping into that signature growl, the one his fans know all too well from the movies. "Want to know what became of that fella?" he stated. "That fella's sitting here, Jimmy, and he's getting mighty sick of hearing from somebody who's never produced anything worthwhile attempt to tear apart the people who did put themselves out there, for their work, for their readers." Silence. You might have heard a pin drop. This wasn't sparring like this was playtime. This was real. This was raw. Two artists, two entirely different types of performers, engaging in a live battle. And the energy in the studio had become charged. Kimmel's usual smirky face faltered, for the first time ever. But his ego wouldn't allow him to back down. He attempted instead to feign defeat in mock surrender. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," he said, holding up his hands. "I think someone's taking this a little too seriously. We're just having a conversation here, Bruce. No need to go all intense and brooding, like you're about to storm Nakatomi Plaza again." The audience gave a few half-hearted laughs, but it was obvious they weren't sure how to react. The humor felt out of place now, forced, even uncomfortable. Bruce stood up, moving slowly. He towered over the desk, looking down at Kimmel with steady calmness. "You find this amusing, Jimmy?" he inquired. You find it funny to invite someone on your show merely to humiliate them on national television. That's not funny. That's bullying. With flashlights. Cameras kept rolling, capturing each second of this live, unscripted drama. Off camera, producers panicked, some waving for a commercial break, others paralyzed, not sure whether to cut the broadcast or just let it happen live on the air. It looked like Kimmel was stuck, about to either retreat or double down. Look, Bruce, I believe you're overreacting, Kimmel replied, his voice not as assertive as he normally spoke with. This is how late night goes. We joke around, have a good time. We don't take things so seriously. Perhaps you've been doing too many serious performances of late and just forgot how to laugh at oneself. It was the wrong thing to say, and as soon as he did so, you could feel the air get even chillier. Bruce's face grew harder. His eyes flashed into Kimmel's, and when he spoke again, it was with the same understated intensity that had built him into a cinematic force for more than 30 years. Forgot how to laugh at myself, Bruce said, his tone razor sharp. Jimmy, I've been in this business for decades. I've worked with legends, directors, actors, people who actually respect the craft. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. There's a difference between comedy and cruelty. What you're doing right now, it's not funny. It's just pathetic. The word struck home. Kimmel's face reddened, his facade of confidence slipping. The host who customarily excelled at a little bit of tension was now clearly shaken. Pathetic, he snapped. You want to discuss pathetic, Bruce? You're the one having a tantrum on live television because somebody had the temerity to ask you a few difficult questions about your career. Maybe if you chose better scripts, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Bruce laughed, but it wasn't the kind where others were invited to join in. It was hard, empty, and contained more truth than humor. Tough question? He asked. Jimmy, you've asked me 0 questions regarding my work, my methodology, or anything that truly counts. You've been attempting to embarrass me for a laugh. That's not journalism. That's not comedy. That's not even entertainment. That's pathetic. He breathed in, slow and measured. You want to know what is truly pathetic? A man grown who founded a whole career on making other people small so he can feel big. The room seemed to be closing in. You could sense the tension in each corner of the studio. The audience had no idea whether they were supposed to look away or lean forward. The band leader appeared to be frozen. Cameramen looked at each other nervously towards the control room, expecting a signal that was not forthcoming. Kimmel attempted to recover the moment by injecting some sarcasm, but even that now seemed unsteady. All right, Bruce, I think we can dial it back a bit here. This is supposed to be entertaining, remember? Late-night television, not therapy. Let's discuss something else. Your family, perhaps? I'm sure the audience would love to get an earful about your private life. It was a misstep. Bruce advanced, bridging the little space between them. His very presence now seemed larger than life, filling up the space like he had done so many times on screen. My private life? He replied, voice icy but steady. Now you want to involve my family in this? That is a line you don't cross, Jimmy. My family's not available, particularly for somebody who considers embarrassing people on TV as good entertainment. Kimmel raised his hands, attempting to protect himself. I wasn't bothering anybody. I'm just doing my job, asking questions, having a conversation. If you can't stand that, Bruce bent in, palms firmly set on Kimmel's desk, eyes pinning him. Your job, he said? Your job is supposed to be about laughter, about bringing joy, maybe giving folks at home a little break from their daily stress. But instead, you use this platform to tear people down, to make them uncomfortable, just so you can feel clever. That's not entertainment, Jimmy. That's exploitation. Kimmel attempted to recline in his seat, getting a bit of space between himself and the actor, who had just turned the tables on him in front of a live crowd. There was nowhere to go, however. Listen, Bruce, I think you're just getting too personal about this, Kimmel replied, his voice more pinched now. This is the way the business is done. Celebrities appear, we make a few jokes, we bend the rules every now and then. It's all part of the game. Bruce's voice increased for the first time, and the raw power of it caused a couple of people in the audience to jump. A game, he said. This isn't a game, Jimmy. These are people's lives, Jimmy, Bruce said, his voice steady but firm. Their careers, their reputations. And you're out here treating it like a game show prize wheel, just spinning it for laughs. He gestured around the studio. You sit here in that comfy chair, surrounded by writers, protected by producers and lawyers, and you act like you can say anything you want, no matter how personal, without any consequences. By this time, the suave host persona that Jimmy Kimmel normally wore like a second skin had all but disappeared. His brow sweated, and his signature smirk dissolved into something a great deal more nervous-looking, something that resembled a little too closely fear. I believe perhaps we should, break for commercial, he grumbled, looking nervously in the direction of the producers backstage. But Bruce wasn't having it. Oh no, he told me, standing up tall and straight. You wanted this to be on live television. You wanted your viewers to watch me squirm. So let's get on with it. Let's give them the show. The audience hardly breathed as Bruce leaned in, not screaming, not losing his temper, but talking with the soft force of a man who had nothing to prove. Let's have a conversation about who you actually are when the cameras are off. Let's have a conversation about how you treat the people on your crew, how you speak about your guests when they're not in the room, how your entire shtick is about punching down at individuals who can't fight back. The words sting, like a slap that resonated louder than a scream. Kimmel seemed dazed. His lips parted, but nothing escaped for a moment. Then finally he stuttered. I don't know what you're talking about. I treat everyone with respect. Ask anyone who works here. Bruce released a low laughter, actually amused but in a manner more incriminating than any insult. Ask anyone, he shook his head. Jimmy, half of the people in this studio are afraid of you. They laugh at your jokes because they have to, not because they're funny ones. They put up with your antics because their paycheck is on the line. That doesn't make it right. That just makes it poisonous. For an instant, the camera caught a glimpse of the crew, techs and assistants who were usually out of sight. Some turned their heads, eyes averted, trying to concentrate on some equipment just to ignore him. That silence. It lingered like it was holding its breath. Kimmel appeared to be a man who'd just come to understand that his safety net had holes. You don't know anything about me, he finally said, but the force had gone out of his voice. You don't know how I operate. You're angry because I asked some questions you didn't care to answer. That's not my fault. Bruce didn't dispute it. He just stared at Kimmel, disappointed. Jimmy, he said softly, that's the actual problem. You still believe this is all about me being angry? It's not. This is about you being so detached from humanity that you can't even perceive the harm you inflict. You've been using sarcasm and cheap humor as a shield for so long, you've lost the ability to speak to people like people. It wasn't boisterous, it wasn't sensational, but it hit like a sledgehammer, removing whatever remained of Kimmel's on-air persona. For the first time, the host didn't just appear shaken, he appeared vulnerable. Like perhaps only, the gravity of what was being stated was beginning to register. But the moment passed. His pride, the very one which had gotten him in the present quagmire, surfaced once more, and he grasped at one last, frantic defense. You know what, Bruce? He told him. I think you're projecting. Possibly the reality is your career just isn't what it once was, and now you're angry with me because I had the nerve to say so. No one forced you to accept those roles. No one forced you to deposit those checks. Gasps circled the studio. Everyone knew. It was the worst thing he could have said. Bruce stood stock still, not raging, not dramatic, just frozen. And the tension in the room clicked into place, heavy as a thunderstorm about to explode. When he spoke, his voice was hardly above a whisper, but Bruce's soft words were heavier, hotter, with punch than if he'd yelled. Jimmy, he said, steady and calm, I've been patient. I've tried to give you the benefit of the doubt, tried to believe maybe this was just a rough night, or maybe you misunderstood how you were coming across. He paused, eyes locked on Kimmel. But now I see exactly who you are. Kimmel opened his mouth to cut in, but Bruce raised a hand. It wasn't belligerent, but it halted the host in his tracks. "No," Bruce said firmly. "You've had your say. Now it's my turn." He took a breath, then continued. "You want to talk about my career choices? Fine. Let's talk about choices. I made choices. I made choices about taking risks, about working with new directors, about backing small movies that would perhaps never have been made had there not been someone willing to put their weight behind them, about continuing on, continuing to act, continuing to push myself, even when the easier path would have been just to leave, even when it wasn't the smart choice. And what did you choose, Jimmy?" The room held its breath. "You took the easy path. You decided to build your success on the shoulders of people who actually do something, people who take risks. You decided to ridicule those people, night in and night out, because it's an easy laugh and keeps your ratings going." The studio was quiet. Tension filled the air like mist. Even Kimmel's producers, smooth as silk in most situations, were stumped, alternating flash signals from backstage but evidently unsure how to halt what was careening out of control before them. As for Jimmy, he resembled a man awakening in a bad dream. His swagger was lost. His quick-witted smile had disappeared. He appeared, trapped. Bruce was not screaming. He did not have to. You sit behind this desk each night, protected by your writers, producers, lawyers, and from that cozy little perch, you shoot at people who put themselves out there, who expose themselves to actual criticism. And when one of them finally appears and has the nerve to tell the truth, you attempt to destroy them. That's not comedy, Jimmy. That's cowardice. Kimmel had turned pale. His voice cracked as he finally stammered, I think we really need to go to a commercial now." But Bruce just gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "Out of hand?" he repeated. "No, Jimmy. This has been the most sincere conversation you've had on this show in years. You just don't care for it because you're accustomed to guests who do need something from you. Guests who will smile graciously and laugh at your nasty jokes just to help get their movie made or shield their reputation. Well, I need nothing from you, and I'm not going to pretend this is fine." Kimmel tried one final time to get things back on track, his voice quivering, but attempting to sound reasonable. "Look, Bruce, I apologize if it seemed like I overstepped. Perhaps we started off on the wrong foot here. Let's start over. We can discuss your new project. Let's keep it positive." Bruce just glared at him for a long, awkward moment, and when he finally said something, his tone was one of disappointment. "You're sorry if you think you went too far?" He slowly echoed back. "Jimmy, you did go too far. The minute you chose to use this platform to shame people rather than honor them, you crossed it. When you chose cruelty over comedy, you went over it again. And now, instead of owning up to it, you're attempting to frame this as about my emotions." The tension had finally come to a boiling point. Bruce backed away from the desk. Then, with no sense of showmanship whatsoever, he turned and faced directly into the primary camera. "You know what? I'm done here. I was invited on this show to discuss my work, to meet with fans, to possibly have a bit of fun. Instead, I went into an ambush, orchestrated by someone who thinks it's funny to be nasty." He turned and began to leave the set. Kimmel leapt from his seat, alarm creeping into his tone. "Bruce, wait. You can't go like this. We're on the air. The public came here to see you." Bruce paused and glanced back at him for the final time. "No, Jimmy. The public came here to be amused. Instead, they saw you attempt to destroy someone for sport." He gazed out at the audience, most of them seated in stunned, shell-shocked silence. "I think they've had enough." "I regret that all of you had to see this," said Bruce, his tone steady but laced with sincerity. "You were better than what you saw tonight." Security had started moving toward the stage. Not quickly, not obtrusively. No one knew who had summoned them, or even why. Bruce wasn't causing a scene. He wasn't yelling. He was simply finished. Kimmel, meanwhile, was in a panic, waving wildly at his producers as the organization of his meticulously rehearsed show began to disintegrate before his eyes. "Bruce, please," he begged, his voice cracking a little. "Let's just sit down and get this done like professionals." But Bruce didn't let up. Professionals? He echoed over his shoulder. Jimmy, a professional, would have never begun this in the first place. A professional would have been prepared. They'd have legitimate questions, legitimate respect. What you did tonight, that wasn't professional. That was just pitiful. As he made it to the stairs that led off the stage, the security guard stepped forward. But it was obvious they weren't there to usher him off. There was no outcry, no fuss. Bruce Willis wasn't storming off. He was merely departing, with his honor in check. Kimmel, still clinging to control, faced the audience again and made one last, desperate plea to save the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Willis, everyone, he said, trying to sound upbeat, but the wobble in his voice betrayed him. We'll be right back after these messages. Bruce paused at the studio exit. He turned and faced the stunned audience one last time, his words cutting through the heavy silence like a spotlight through fog. Jimmy, he said, I hope someday you know the difference between making people laugh with you and making people laugh at somebody else. He paused for a beat, then tossed in, until then, maybe consider twice before taking your platform to eviscerate someone, just because you can. And with that, Bruce Willis stepped and left the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio, leaving behind one of the most incendiary, unforgettable showdowns in late-night TV history. The cameras rolled to the bitter end, catching the stunned expression on Kimmel's face as the full force of what had just transpired hit him, not just to his show, but to his public persona. And that's how it is. The time Bruce Willis stood his ground, pulled back the veil on late-night TV, and walked off with his head held high. But now we want to know what you have to say. How did you feel about the confrontation? Was Bruce in his right to call out Jimmy? Or did he cross the line? Leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed the above story, be sure to subscribe for more revelations from the realm of entertainment and beyond.